On the 23rd of April, 2026, China's embassy in Tehran issued an emergency advisory. The message was clear. Chinese citizens in Iran should leave the country as soon as possible. Move to safe areas. Avoid government buildings, military installations, anything that could become a target. The foreign ministry described the situation on the ground as complex and volatile. Airspace has partially reopened, they acknowledged. But the regional environment remains fragile and unpredictable. Now, here's why this matters so enormously. The last time China issued a warning like this was the 27th of February, 2026. Just one day later, one single day later, the United States and Israel launched the most consequential military operation in the history of the modern Middle East. Joint airstrikes on Iran, coordinated, surgical, devastating. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who had ruled Iran for 36 years, was killed in his own office in central Tehran at 9:40 inches in the morning, local time. A man who had shaped the ideological architecture of an entire region for nearly 4 decades was gone, and the war had begun. So when Beijing issues the exact same advisory now, at this exact moment, you have to ask yourself, is this a coincidence? History says no. China does not issue these warnings casually. China has hundreds of millions of dollars in trade exposure in Iran through its 2 5-year cooperation agreement signed in 2021. Its energy companies, its contractors, its citizens working in infrastructure, they are there in significant numbers. When Beijing tells them to leave, it is because Beijing knows something. Or more precisely, it is because Beijing is watching something it does not like. And it is making sure its people are not caught in the blast radius when it happens. Let us step back for a moment, because some of you may not have been following this conflict from the very beginning, and you need the context to understand the gravity of what is unfolding. On the 28th of February, 2026, in an operation that the United States and Israel named Epic Fury, joint strikes hit Iran across 24 provinces. Schools were struck. Military installations were destroyed. And in what legal scholars are now describing as one of the most consequential violations of established international norms since the Second World War, a sitting head of state, the supreme leader of a sovereign nation, was assassinated. Let that land for a second. Executive Order 12333, signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1981, explicitly prohibits employees of the United States government from engaging in or conspiring to engage in political assassination. That order has been on the books for 45 years. It has never been formally repealed. And yet, on the 28th of February, American intelligence was used to locate and kill Ali Khamenei, not a terrorist in a cave somewhere, the head of state of a country with 90 million people. The United States ambassador to the United Nations said the strike was lawful. Quote, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That principle is not a matter of politics. It is a matter of global security. But legal scholars at just about every credible institution, from the International Court of Justice observers to academics at Oxford, Georgetown, and the London School of Economics, have pointed out that under the law of armed conflict and the United Nations Charter, the question of whether a strike on a sitting head of state constitutes an unlawful assassination is not settled. It is deeply contested. And the precedent it sets is terrifying. Because if the United States can kill Iran's supreme leader using Israeli aircraft and its own intelligence, then every nuclear-armed state on the planet just learned something very disturbing about the rules of the game. Iran's response was ferocious. Missile strikes against Israel, drone attacks on American military bases across the region, strikes on the energy infrastructure of Gulf states hosting United States assets. And the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz, that last move sent shockwaves through every economy on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important maritime choke point in the world. Approximately 20% of the world's oil supply moves through that passage every single day. When Iran closed it, oil prices spiked. Global supply chains fractured. The International Energy Agency described what followed as, and I am paraphrasing carefully here, the largest oil supply disruption in the recorded history of the global market. We are living through an energy crisis that dwarfs the 1973 oil embargo. And yet somehow, it is not being described with the same urgency. Now we get to the negotiations. And this is where the story gets truly extraordinary, because nothing about these negotiations is what it appears to be on the surface. After weeks of military strikes and counterstrikes, and after enormous pressure from Pakistan, a ceasefire was brokered on the 8th of April, 2026. Pakistan's role here cannot be overstated. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, Field Marshal Asim Munir, and Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar worked around the clock, with Pakistan essentially throwing its entire diplomatic weight behind getting both sides to the table. It worked. On the 11th of April, a remarkable scene unfolded in Islamabad. Vice President J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner, yes, the president's son-in-law, arrived at Nur Khan Air Base to begin face-to-face talks with Iran. It was the first direct in-person engagement between the United States and Iran since 2015, when the Obama administration negotiated what became known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal that Donald Trump subsequently tore up in 2018. The Iranian delegation was led by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Over 10,000 security personnel were deployed across Islamabad. The Serena Hotel was commandeered as the negotiating venue. The talks lasted 21 hours across 3 rounds, the first indirect, the second and third direct, and then they collapsed. The core issue was nuclear. Trump said it plainly. Most points were agreed to, but the only point that really mattered, nuclear, was not. Iran insisted on its right to enrich uranium. The United States demanded zero enrichment, full stop. Araghchi said the talks ended with the two sides inches away from a memorandum of understanding and accused the American delegation of moving the goalposts at the last moment. Vance said the United States had made its final and best offer. Washington's message was, we were flexible. They refused. Tehran's message was, we were close. They sabotaged it. 2 days after the talks failed, Trump imposed a full naval blockade on Iranian ports. The United States Navy has since redirected at least 33 ships attempting to enter or leave Iranian waters. American destroyers are physically intercepting Iranian flag vessels in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. As of the 24th of April, the guided missile destroyer USS Rafael Peralta was photographed intercepting an Iranian flagged ship attempting to reach an Iranian port. This is not a metaphor. This is a kinetic blockade of a sovereign nation's coastline. And here is the thing about blockades under international law. Under Article 42 of the United Nations Charter, a naval blockade is explicitly classified as an act of war when it is not authorized by the Security Council. The United States did not seek Security Council authorization. Russia and China would have vetoed it immediately. So America is conducting what international law considers an act of war against Iran, while simultaneously claiming that a ceasefire is in effect. You can see why the Iranians are confused. You can see why the Iranians are furious. Now, let us talk about what is happening this weekend, right now in Islamabad. Because the diplomatic theater currently playing out there deserves its own analysis. Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, arrived in Pakistan on the 24th of April. He was received by Pakistani officials. But here is what Iran made crystal clear from the moment he touched down. He is not there to talk to the Americans. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson, Esmail Baghai, posted on social media directly and unambiguously, no meeting is planned to take place between Iran and the United States. Iran's observations will be conveyed to Pakistan. Araghchi himself confirmed that his presence in Islamabad is for consultations with Pakistani mediators about how to end what Tehran calls, and I will quote the exact framing they use because the language is deliberate, the American-imposed war of aggression. Simultaneously, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff boarded a plane from Washington and flew to Islamabad. The White House press secretary confirmed it publicly. She said the Iranians had reached out and requested this in-person conversation. Iran says that is not true. Tasnim news agency, which is affiliated with Iran's Supreme National Security Council, reported flatly that there are no negotiations with Americans on the agenda. So you have the American envoys physically in Islamabad. You have the Iranian foreign minister physically in Islamabad. And both sides are saying they're not talking to each other. Pakistan, the country doing the thankless, exhausting, genuinely remarkable work of mediating between two sides who cannot even agree on whether they are negotiating, is described by Al Jazeera's correspondent in Islamabad as cautiously optimistic. And then there is the vice president question. J.D. Vance did not travel to Islamabad. And the reason why is revealing. Officials told CNN directly, Vance will not attend because Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, is not attending. The White House views Ghalibaf as Iran's head of delegation, the equivalent of Vance. If Ghalibaf does not come, Vance does not come. Simple as that. Vance is on standby in the United States in case talks progress to a point where his presence becomes necessary. Ghalibaf, meanwhile, is sitting in Tehran warning America about what is coming economically. Let's talk about Ghalibaf for a moment, because what he is saying deserves to be taken seriously. Ghalibaf posted publicly on his verified social media account describing United States Treasury bonds as a house of cards. He called out the way global oil pricing works through what he called vibe trading, arguing that when Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz, American financial instruments become fragile in ways that most ordinary investors do not fully understand. This is not random rhetoric. This is the parliamentary speaker of Iran, the man America is trying to negotiate with, publicly warning that Iran intends to use its leverage over the world's most critical oil shipping route as an economic weapon against the United States and its allies. And the underlying numbers support his argument more than the American establishment would like to admit. The Iranian economy is in freefall. The International Monetary Fund estimates it will shrink by 6.1% in 2026, with inflation running close to 69%. The rial has collapsed to 1.32 million per United States dollar. Iran's own central bank governor has reportedly urged the president to pursue a peace deal urgently. By every conventional economic metric, Iran is losing this war badly. But here's the thing. A cornered, economically devastated country that still controls physical geography, specifically a 2-1-mile wide choke point through which a fifth of the world's energy supply passes, is not a country without leverage. It is a country with a single devastating card left to play. If Iran permanently closes the Strait of Hormuz or turns it into a contested war zone that no insurer will cover, global energy prices would spike to levels that would trigger recessions across Europe, Asia, and potentially the United States itself. American gasoline prices are already at $4.05 per gallon nationally. The United States Energy Secretary told CNN on camera that prices may not return below $3 until next year. That is not Iran's economy bleeding. That is American consumers bleeding. And Ghalibaf knows it. He is saying so, openly, in public. Now let us bring in China, because China's role in this entire conflict is one of the most important and underreported dimensions of what is happening. China's defense minister affirmed publicly that Chinese ships would continue to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without restriction, regardless of the American blockade. Beijing declared its 5-year cooperation agreement with Iran worth hundreds of billions of dollars and covering energy, infrastructure, and military development to be sovereign and non-negotiable. Over 40% of China's oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This is not an abstraction for Beijing. This is a matter of national energy security. A prolonged American naval blockade of Iranian ports does not just hurt Iran. It threatens China's oil supply chain in ways that Beijing simply cannot tolerate. At the same time, China is evacuating its citizens. Think about what that tells you. China is simultaneously telling the world that it supports Iran's sovereignty, that its ships will keep moving through the strait, and that its civilian nationals should leave Iran as fast as possible. Those two positions are not contradictory, they are complementary. China is protecting its geopolitical interests while protecting its people. And the fact that the February 27th advisory preceded the start of the war by exactly one day means that this April advisory may be telling us something about what Beijing believes is coming next. Meanwhile, on the trade front, the United States and China are in a deeply fragile moment, with the Trump-Xi summit expected for May 2026 now under significant strain. Prediction markets have dropped the odds of that summit happening to below 72%, down from 78% just a week ago. American Trade Representative Jameson Greer acknowledged recently that managed trade is about the best Washington can realistically hope for with China. Beijing, for its part, has rolled out 3 separate pieces of legislation, giving itself legal tools to penalize foreign companies that drop Chinese suppliers, including provisions for exit bans on foreign executives operating in China. The message from Beijing to the global business community could not be clearer. We can make your executives hostages if we choose to. The Strait of Hormuz and the Taiwan Strait are not the only choke points in this world. Let us talk about North Korea, because the narrative here has shifted dramatically, and most people have missed it. There is a historical record of North Korea sending delegations to Iran, most notably in April of 2024, when the External Economic Relations Minister Yoon Jong-ho traveled to Tehran. Analysts at the time described it as part of building what they called an anti-imperialist alliance against the United States. North Korea, Iran, Russia, the emerging axis that Washington has been warning about for years. But here's what is happening now. South Korea's National Intelligence Service briefed lawmakers in early April of 2026, and the conclusion was striking. North Korea has not sent weapons or supplies to Iran since the war began on the 28th of February. Not one shipment. Iran's other major allies, China and Russia, have been issuing frequent statements about the conflict. North Korea's foreign ministry has issued exactly 2 statements, both notably toned down. Seoul's intelligence assessment is that North Korea is deliberately distancing itself from Iran in the hope of opening a new diplomatic channel with the United States. Kim Jong-un is, in effect, watching which way the wind blows and deciding that this is a moment to court Washington rather than Tehran. That calculation may or may not pay off for Pyongyang, but it tells you something important about how the rest of the world is reading this conflict. Countries that were previously aligned with Iran are recalculating. They're asking, is Iran going to survive this? Is the Islamic Republic that emerged from the 1979 revolution, the one that Ayatollah Khamenei built and that Khamenei preserved for 36 years, going to still be standing in a year? And the honest answer, based on what we are seeing, is that nobody knows. Let us talk about the succession crisis inside Iran, because this is the piece that makes every single other piece more complicated. When Ali Khamenei was killed, there was no designated successor. The constitutional mechanism for appointing a supreme leader flows through the Assembly of Experts. On the 8th of March, 2026, just 8 days after Khamenei's death, the Assembly of Experts announced Mohammad Khamenei, the dead leader's own son, as the new supreme leader. International observers, including France, Russia, and United Nations officials, immediately flagged concerns. Some called it rushed. Some called it a dynastic consolidation that violated the spirit of the Islamic Republic's founding principles. And significantly, reports emerged that Mohammad Khamenei did not appear at the main 40-day memorial for his own father, with some outlets citing possible health complications. Trump himself said publicly that the Iranian government is seriously fractured. He extended the ceasefire deadline explicitly on the grounds that Iran needed time to present a unified proposal. That framing is not just diplomatic language. It is an acknowledgement that the United States does not know who is actually in charge in Tehran right now. Is it President Masoud Pezeshkian? Is it Ghalibaf? Is it Mohammad Khamenei, who is still consolidating authority? Is it the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which has its own command structure and its own institutional interests? And crucially, do all of these figures agree on whether to make a deal? Because they clearly do not. Iran released multiple versions of its 10-point peace proposal during the ceasefire period, with differences between the Persian and English texts, differences that Iranian officials later tried to explain away. The United States described the Iranians as seriously fractured. Iran described the Americans as maximalist. and accuse them of deliberate sabotage. Both may be true. What is certainly true is that nobody is in full control of this process, and that is the most dangerous kind of conflict there is. Let us look at the broader humanitarian picture, because it is being swallowed by the geopolitical noise. The World Food Programme released a report this week warning that acute food insecurity is at alarming and deeply entrenched levels across 10 countries: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Myanmar, Nigeria, Pakistan, South Sudan, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Sudan imports more than half of its fertilizers by sea from the Persian Gulf region. With the Strait of Hormuz functionally closed, those shipments have been rerouted through the Red Sea, a longer, more expensive, more dangerous route. Food prices in Gaza are 85% higher than they were before the Iran war began. Mobile phone prices in Iran itself have surged between 40 and 50% following the halt of imports that previously flowed through the United Arab Emirates. And speaking of the Emirates, that relationship is a case study in how wars unravel things that seemed permanent. The United Arab Emirates and Iran have been among each other's most important trading partners for 2 decades. Roughly 1/3 of all goods entering Iran passed through the Emirates. During the war, Iran struck Emirati civilian buildings, oil facilities, and infrastructure, including a data center linked to Oracle. The Emirates recalled its ambassador from Tehran. This week, Emirati state security arrested what it described as members of a network linked to Iran. That trading relationship, built over 20 years, worth billions of dollars, may be functionally over. So where does this all leave us? What is actually going to happen? Here is my honest assessment, and I want to be careful to call it that, an assessment, not a prediction. Because anyone who tells you they know exactly how this ends is lying to you. The next 72 hours in Islamabad are going to tell us a great deal. Either Araghchi and the American envoys find a way through Pakistani intermediaries to get a framework down on paper, something both sides can take home and call progress. Or they leave Islamabad again, just as they left on the 12th of April, with nothing signed, nothing agreed, and another deadline looming. If they leave without a framework, watch what China does next. Watch whether the advisory that went out on the 23rd of April is followed by something kinetic, the way the February 27th advisory was followed by Operation Epic Fury on the 28th. Watch whether Ghalibaf arrives in Islamabad. If he gets on a plane, it means Tehran has decided the diplomatic track is worth one more serious attempt. If he stays in Tehran, it means Iran has concluded that talking is no longer the strategy, and that the Strait of Hormuz, the energy markets, and the Russian and Chinese relationships are the real leverage play. Watch what Russia does. Araghchi's tour goes from Islamabad to Muscat to Moscow. Moscow is the last stop. Why Moscow? Because Russia's position in this conflict is deeply complicated. Russia needs Iran's drone technology. Russia benefits from high oil prices. But Russia also needs its relationship with the United States to not collapse entirely, and it is watching the Trump administration with its own set of calculations. What message does Moscow send back through Araghchi? That may be the most important piece of diplomatic communication that happens this week. And watch China. The evacuation advisory is the alarm bell. China telling its citizens to leave Iran is Beijing sending a signal not just to its own citizens, but to Washington. It is saying, we are watching. We see what you might be about to do. We are on record. If something happens, our people are out. That is not a country that is neutral. That is a country that is positioning itself for whatever comes next. The world changed on the 28th of February, 2026. A war began that nobody wanted to call a world war, but that has already disrupted global energy markets, triggered a food crisis across multiple continents, sparked a succession crisis in a nation of 90 million people, and brought 2 nuclear-armed superpowers, the United States and China, into direct confrontation at one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Executive Order 12333, which banned American participation in political assassination, is now a historical artifact. The United Nations Charter's prohibition on blockades without Security Council authorization is being tested in real time by American destroyers in the Arabian Sea. The 2015 nuclear deal, which took 2 years to negotiate under the Obama administration and was demolished in 2018 by the same president who is now trying to negotiate a replacement, is the ghost haunting every single conversation happening in Islamabad this weekend. Because both sides know what is possible. Both sides know a deal can be made. The question is whether the domestic politics, on both sides, the hardliners in Tehran, the maximalists in Washington, the Israeli government with its own profound interest in perpetual conflict, and the IRGC commanders who believe the blockade must be met with a military response will allow that deal to survive. History is not reassuring on this front, but it is not hopeless either. What I know for certain is this. When China tells its people to leave a country for the second time in less than 2 months, using almost identical language in an almost identical diplomatic context, and the last time it did that a war began the very next day, you do not ignore that signal. You pay attention. You ask questions. You tell the people around you to pay attention too. That is what we are here to do. If this kind of analysis matters to you, if you believe that understanding what is actually happening in the world without the spin, without the oversimplification, without the cable news theater matters to your life and the lives of the people you care about, then share this, subscribe, leave a comment telling us what you think, what you want us to dig into next. This conversation is more important right now than it has been in a very long time, and we're going to keep having it.